Okay, this is the one I writ. All the chickens coming home. I don't know for sure when it began, the people for whom it did begin, but I know that in the 68 years of readings and listenings and watchings I have done of my world, my several small corners of this earth, the tables I have sat at and the entertainments I have enjoyed have been consistent in this, that where I live, me, who pulls my strings, who watches from my above and cares for me and mine, the laws that constrain and compel me, the deeds done by my ancestors, what we are indeed the best the world has ever known. That is the assumption. And the reiteration of these facts is very important. The airspace in my head should be full of these bells and as little else as possible. And challenging any of these idols puts one out beyond the pale. And I don't understand. It's not so much that that's false, that the civilization that I come from is the greatest the world has ever known and is the most greatest hope for humanity. I would disagree with that, but it's needing that it be that is sick. The narrative going back to Rome, ancient Rome, and before to Greece, this is the mom and dad of Europe, and before to Greece, the narrative we think is a line that leads directly, unswervingly to us. And these, our exemplars and forebears, defeated the forces of unrule, misrule after his invention. Satan, the hordes, the Persians, the Gauls, the Mongols, the others, the Vietnamese, the Russians, the barbarians, the Nazis, whatever name you want to give to them. It was always us that defeated them. We won. We are really not entirely sure how the Greeks and Romans thought about all this themselves. Scholars all over the pages and screens describe communities rather like us, but the connective evidence is pretty slim. For instance, we insist the Greeks were xenophobic, like we are. But Xenophon himself fought for a Persian king, wrote a glorifying fictional biography of the Persian king in the Cyropedia, Cyrus the Great, the Persian systems of class and obedience to the reckless experiments in Athenian democracy. In other words, Xenophon himself was not a big fan of the Greeks. We co-opt the word. Herodotus, father of history, enthusiastically covered the wars with Persia, admiring the enemy. Solon insisted the Egyptians were the greatest civilization and source of ancient wisdom. Socrates insisted on self-examination as prerequisite to goodness. And Alexander went native in Persia. So they really don't help America's xenophobia. The Roman aristocracy, model for Elizabeth II and Thomas Jefferson, were perhaps the first to be actually xenophobic, to decide the barbarians of the east and north of them were inferior beings. Science wasn't at that point useful yet, but the Roman phalanx was the evidence this horrible state needed to try to do what it did, then fell to the hordes after 1,000 years of hubris, to the Mongols, to the Goths, to the whatever. And all these suppositions can be proved and disproved, argued and insisted on, but a dust does settle. We have developed a habit, personal and political, that those who do not drink, eat, fuck, and pray like we do are less than us, therefore are savage, repressive, uncivilized, and stupid. And should anyone be confused by the contradiction obvious of bombing this community into oblivion, killing children too young to have become the evil things they are sure to become, rest assured you are misinformed. Well, all this is going on and has been happening for as long as I have been alive. I accept it is what others do, how they construct their universe, and it is strange to me, as I said before, that they do this. But one thing doth lead to the next, doth it not? What would the best of us, not I, do if we are hated the way some of us appear to be hated by whoever? One would be rendered without option, it certainly seems. So I I personally have to confess that living in the Middle East as a child, living in the West Indies as a child, living in the United States as a child into an adult, and living in Britain as an adult, and then back in the United States as an adult, I have never experienced hate. And I have to think, is that because I've not been hated, or because I'm not looking for it? Or because the people who my civilization has done terrible things to don't hate like we tend to do. So I would assume, rather like the Kennedys, who were born rich, I would assume that I would not, if I were born rich, I'm born very, very privileged, as I've just said. If I'm born privileged, I would assume that I would walk around without the grievance and the burden that a marginalized and an occupied community would. I should be free of those things. So it is strange to me, and it seems like a sort of innate capacity that we have. If we don't have something to hate, we will invent it. I had this thought the other day about, so we're growing up in primitive southern France, 30,000 years ago. And there are saber-toothed tigers around. And saber-toothed tigers famously created bad dreams for children. And they're still in our collective unconscious. And so we're afraid of the night, and we're afraid of saber-toothed tigers because they would come and kill us. There's evidence of skulls being crushed by those big teeth and stuff like that. So does a priest come along and say, if a priest was to come along and say, well, they're doing that because you're living in their territory and they're hungry. The priest doesn't say that. The priest says they're doing that because they're evil. They're killing you, your babies or whatever, knocking off your weak because they're evil. And the really clever priest says, well, you have sinned, therefore you deserve to have this evil inflicted on you. And if you don't smarten up and fly right, you're going to be plagued by saber-toothed tigers for the rest of time. Now, I ask anybody here who is religious, tell me that is not the story. The priest comes and spins a story that puts you at the center of the picture, where you like to be, and says that anything that threatens you is Satan, is the other and evil, and also because you have been unfaithful to me, your priest, your God, that is why they are plaguing you. And so what does that do to that community of people who believe that hogwash? It turns them into a certain kind of person, the person who is at the root of what's going on horrifically all over the world right now. And it is all over the world. So yeah, remember, saber-toothed tigers, grizzly bears, lions, rhinoceroses, hippopotami, they're not out there to kill you because they're evil. They're out there because you're on their land and they're hungry.